Be sure to let everyone know that they are being recorded, especially since. So, welcome back to Unreasonable Swingers. This is the week before the 2020 election day. I won't say the 2020 election, because as Patrick quite rightly pointed out on our last call, the election has been ongoing for quite some time. And while election day comes to a close next week, they will still be receiving votes after election.
Depending on the jurisdiction, but it also, in like Alaska, they won't even start counting mail-in votes for a week until after the election day.
Again, welcome, Patrick, to Unreasonable Swingers. Thank you for being here, and you are being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with being recorded, you should drop off since you are a citizen of the EU or the UK, depending upon your perspective these days.
For the moment.
Which, as you said, which jurisdiction you're in.
Yep.
All right. So from the unreasonable swinger, the swing vote, the centrist that may vote for a Democrat or may vote for a Republican, depending upon their particular position on a given policy. Excuse me. And the only progress that is ever made is not from a progressive, but from the unreasonable person, because reasonable people are complacent. And so the progressive centrist is the unreasonable swinger. That's the person who can get things done. And it's your vote, if you are a swinger, that will decide things in this election. And right now we have an incredible upswell in terms of interested voters. And so with the newness of them, and right now we're looking at statistics from Pennsylvania, excuse me, but with the upswell of newly registered voters, what percentage of newly registered voters do you think are centrists? How many of them are swingers?
This is difficult to ascertain because I identify as a Republican, have been registered as a Republican in the state of Pennsylvania. The reason I go into a long-winded answer is because just because somebody registered as a party person under a specific entity, i.e. Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever, meaning you can qualify as somebody other than Republican or Democrat, I believe, in Pennsylvania. The point I'm making is the fact that just because they've registered as a given party in this current election cycle doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be voting for that particular constituency.
If you're registering as a Republican this year, how firm do you think those votes are?
For county and or congressional, I think they're probably pretty solid.
Yep.
If you're talking about the presidential, kiddo, I think all bets are off. Honestly, I've seen too many people. And again, when you look down like at Ballotpedia and you look at what Trump carried the last time and what the constituent or the incumbent got as far as the percentages, there was always quite a large swing. So again, just because they're registered one way doesn't mean they're always going to vote in that particular process. And there's always a differential.
Well, we know that from our own personal experience, at least with my own, not our, but my own, excuse me, with having registered in back and forth in every single party. It didn't matter what my party registration was,
right,
as far as who I was voting for.
And again, I think there's a lot of people currently. Pennsylvania is one of those states where it's easier to pick a party even if you don't plan on voting for that particular party because it's the only way you can vote in a primary.
Well, that is absolutely true. And I want to run through the dashboard that we have here and help people understand it so they can go explore for themselves, because as we've said, you need to go do your own homework. You need to go understand what's going on around you. And so if you want to understand how your peers are thinking about politics in Pennsylvania, if you're a Pennsylvanian, this dashboard points out all the registered voter data as of the 19th of October, 2020. because that was the last day you could register as a voter in Pennsylvania for this upcoming election day. That is going to be the 3rd of November, the first Tuesday of November. And the way that it's organized, you have several slicers over in the left corner where you can pick and choose which party you'd like to see, or the sex or the gender, the county that the voter is registered in, the voter status in terms of active or inactive. And it's remarkable to me how many voters that are newly registered are already inactive. And then it lists out the 18 congressional districts that are in Pennsylvania.
How do they qualify that if they just registered and qualified?
I'm not sure. That was actually a question that my kids were asking, for instance, when they saw this dashboard. And so the only thing I could think of was that there might be some incomplete data, some missing data, unverifiable.
Right, okay, I follow. Yeah, and if it's incomplete, it doesn't mean they haven't registered, but it may mean that they don't qualify them in one form or fashion because there's a piece of data missing. Okay, that would make sense.
Or there was some sort of challenge or something, you know. But it is a relatively small number, but it is it's not
there.
It's not invisible. I mean, it is a percentage. So again, explaining the dashboard, along the right side of the dash, you see in the bottom right corner, we'll go there first, there's a registration date. And the dates look weird there because data from these counties is awful all over the place.
Yes.
Right. So you can use the slider to determine when people registered. So if I go all the way out to from between the August 16th and June 4th of 3001, there is one person in Pike County whose record reflects that, right? So it's not a terribly big number when you look at those weird dates that are out there. So don't think that there are dead people voting. It could just be bad data in the database, but it could also be people cheating. Who knows? Maybe this will be a way that we'll find out. But if I'm interested,
it doesn't seem to be a large number.
No, it doesn't seem to be a large number, is right. So if I go looking for just the people who have registered between the 1st of June and whatever is the oldest date in the database, we see that there's close to 600,000 folks. So a lot of people were registered. And there's only 589,000 of them that are active. So there's 3,000 or so that are inactive. You know? So that's just, again, not a big number, but it's, again, not invisible. But at any rate, if you use these slicers over here on the left, you can then influence the graphics that you'll see on the right. The top graphic on the right shows the descending sequences should be in terms of the counties and the number of votes that show up. So in that 589,000 votes, there are roughly 50 or 60,000 of them that are in the Philadelphia County. And if you hover over the bar, you'll actually see the number. And if you click on the legend up on the top, you can actually filter down for just that number. So you see that there are 990 people in Philadelphia County, actually just 990 active across the state, across all the counties, that did not list a party. Right. So if you click on the legend again, that highlighting goes away. Right.
What I did was, just for your people that are viewing this to look at, I just clicked on basically the registrations, the new registrations from September, not of this year, but September of last year through now. Okay.
Yep.
And essentially the numbers are almost even. So new voters in the last year, essentially, okay, they're almost identical.
I agree. Let me come back to that in a moment. All right. So again, just to finish out, there's one last graphic on the dashboard here. So in the center right, you see the within a given county, the number of people registered to each of those parties. So in the top graphic, you see the parties listed in the legend. This graphic is limited. There's only so many parties it can bring in. So you may not see, for instance, the Republicans, because they're in the R's, and it just happened to meet its max limit for the number of items it could have in the legend over here. So if you're interested in seeing that type of data for this particular graphic up here. Again, on the left, the slices over here, these have all of the individual data points that you have in that.
So if you want R, you just click R there, and it'll.
So if you click R over here, I am now looking at the 235,000 Rs, or registered Republicans that are active now, because we also have the active status still chosen. So again, this shows me how many Republicans were registered in each of those counties across the top, and this shows in the center right the grand total count. If again, there's a scroll bar so that you can scroll up and down in this list. If you hold down the control key, you can select more than one item in the list. So I hold down the control key and I click on the D to now select the number of Democrats, and now you're seeing in very clear highlight across the top the blue Democrat new registrations, because remember, this is from the registration date of January 1st to 2020 at this point, against the Democrats, which shows in Philadelphia County just how fucked those Republicans are. If you hover over these bars, you can actually see it.
But I want to point out.
Oh, hang on. I'm nearly to your spotlight, right? So, and then you can hold court for the rest of the time. All right. So again, there's 51,000 Democrats there, and there's 11,000 or close to 12,000 Republicans. All right. But I said a moment ago why I would be running as one of the party members if I wanted to, because again, if I hold down the control key and click on the I for the independents, you see in the center right now the remarkable difference that shows up with the people who registered as independents. Now, part of that is because if you see this list of parties, there are hundreds and hundreds of parties that people identify with. And so if you're an independent, you probably invented your own freaking party. So that's a fair point. So I'm going to be grouping all of those so people can see what that count looks like, but it's going to be nowhere near what these other pieces are up here. Right? Across the entire state of Pennsylvania, since at least the start of the year.
Yeah.
Again, January 1st. And so I imagine that this trend would also continue if we went back to take a look at it in September as well. It's just about even in terms of new registrations, and new impressively has over 9 million registered voters at this point. I say impressively because it was under 8 million in January. That's
right. And if you look at the numbers, okay, there is a significant differential, but that's also driven by demographics.
It's also driven by what now?
The demographics, meaning that it seems that even though there has been an increase since the primaries for new Republicans or Republicans gaining voter rolls, okay, in Pennsylvania, if you look at the numbers that you have there now, there is a substantial differential in the state for Democrats over Republicans.
Yes.
Okay. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to carry. And eventually we have to discuss this. So whether we do it now or do it later, the point is that this election is going to be different. I was just having this conversation with my kid, specifically on one issue, which is likely voters. Yes. And I think one of the problems that the polling has at the moment, which has got a big hole in it as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that they're basing their likely voter methodology for analyzing who a likely voter is on antiquated thought process, on antiquated algorithms. Yeah. So essentially, I think a lot more people are going to vote and are voting this cycle than have ever voted before. We normally have in presidential elections, I think it's about 55 or 57%, basically contribution of the populace. So in essence, 58% of the registered voters that are allowed to vote, usually 55, 57, you can go back and look. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm within a couple of percentage points one way or the other.
Already saw all the grand total early voting that was done in the 2016 election. Mm-hmm. They reached that grand total number with 11 days to go in early voting.
You understand my point. And the answer is, and your people who are watching this have to understand that the reason I think the polling is faulty at this point is that there's a whole constituency, and it's a substantial one, okay? There's a whole constituency that historically has never really ever voted before. And I'm not just talking about kids, or I shouldn't say kids, young adults, okay, that are 18 years old and voting in their first one. I'm talking about the likely voter that just basically most of the time didn't think his vote or her vote.
You reminded me of the 55-year-old school teacher that suddenly wakes up and realizes that they need to make a will, right?